Is Rose Pearson. I'm Executive Director of Circle Theater here in Fort Worth, Texas. And as Executive Director, I will just start off and do a little lecture about that term, because in the world of the arts, an Executive Director is definitely the chief who wears all the hats. So that means that I work on the artistic side of the theater and also on the business management side of the theater. And so when you assume when you assume Executive Director, then you're handling both sides of the theater in our case. There's a lot of parameters, and that's the first thing a producing organization has to get used to, because you don't just rehearse and then, oh, that scene needs some more rehearsal, so we'll go until midnight or 1 or 2 or 3 in the morning. You have a set number of hours as an equity organization that you are allowed to rehearse those actors. They have a set number of breaks during that time, and also if it involves working through supper or lunchtime, they're allowed set number of hours and minutes for those purposes, so that in no way whatsoever do you abuse the privilege of using a member of their union. So as a producing organization, you have to be even more organized. I know a lot of times for the artistic side of a producing organization, when you're just getting into the meat of a scene and the stage manager says, equity break, we have to take a 15-minute time now. It can feel pretty frustrating, but that's part of the give and take. On the other hand, as an equity organization, you do have the commitment of that actor and that union, and you know specifically what you can ask of them and what they are expected to provide. For whatever organization, unless you're a non-equity theater, if you are an equity theater, you are required to have an equity stage manager who is in charge of knowing all of the equity rules and regulations and guiding the producer, who might unwittingly not be obeying or following some of those regulations. And so that's one of the first requirements of an equity organization. There are several different tiers of equity. Circle Theater is what's known as a small professional theater -1, which means we are the first level. That would be the smallest, least hours required of their actors to rehearse, and the lowest pay scale. Another issue is whatever level you're at is how many, it indicates how many actors that you hire at that level. So for example, for us, and again I speak to the small professional theater, not the larger ones, in Circle's instance we have 125 seats, so obviously we're going to be at a more conservative range. And for that range, equity requires that we commit to hire 2 equity actors and an equity stage manager minimum for every show that we do. So at the beginning of each season, since we do 5 shows a year, we have committed to hire 15 equity persons, actors working for us. And as I said, that increases as every level goes upwards. I think other things are, as I said, as an equity actor, you do get health benefits. Equity health is a very good benefit. It's one of the best. And so it's one of the reasons to be an equity actor. I would also like to add that in Texas, I don't know where you're watching this, but if you happen to be in a right-to-work state, then it increases some of the mystery of working or whether not to work as an equity organization. Because the strict equity rules in some states don't apply to a state that is a right-to-work state. For example, if you earn all of your what we call points from acting in equity theaters that makes you eligible to join equity, and you decide at that time you do not want to join equity, you do not have to. You are not required to, because this is a right-to-work state. And if you do not join equity, you can work for non-professional theaters or you can work for professional theaters. You have that choice. If you do join equity, you cannot work for a theater unless it is going to follow the rules of equity and pay you equity benefits, pension, and scale. Some of the other things that come into consideration as an equity, picture call, which is the side of the theater that I work with very often. You are only allowed a specific number of hours that you can call actors in for picture call. You cannot call them in for picture call anytime you want. You have to give them 24 hours notice before you do a picture call. If you have video, the rules and regulations become a little bit more intricate. So there's always a 24 hours in advance notice, and is it according to the rules of what equity allows you to photograph or film. You cannot do any casual PR whatsoever. Just like I said, as an actor, you have a decision whether you're going to go equity or not go equity. As a producer, you have a decision. Are you going to be an equity producer or a non-equity producer? As I said, we kind of casually divide live theater into professional theater or community theater. And to say a place is a community theater is not denigrating it in any way whatsoever. It just says that that organization is more geared toward an avocation as opposed to a vocation in theater. Whereas a professional theater, you are expecting the quality and the caliber to be an actor that has dedicated their lives full-time to the skill of acting, and the level of the overall production should be a lot more professional. So in making the decision for Circle Theater, which, as I said earlier, is a smaller theater, we have 125 seats and not a lot of loose change lying around to pay pension and health and equity scale, we decided that we wanted to make that commitment as a theater to the actors in our area, because so many, in order to make a living, have to leave Texas, and we're the losers because of that. So in order to offer them the chance to live here and to follow their profession, we made the commitment. And honestly, equity is the biggest portion of our budget every year. This is what we spend the most money on. Other theaters that don't have that kind of budget, or that is not their goal in particular, this isn't what they're formed to do, can hire equity theaters on an individual basis. They have to meet the same rules and regulations, but they are not kept from hiring an equity actor. Overall, the fee for hiring an equity actor on a one-time basis is higher than if you're a theater that does it on an ongoing basis. But then that's assuming you're not going to be hiring an equity actor every time, or else you'd be in an equity theater. And also for us, we hire non-professionals. Not every actor that works for a professional theater or an equity theater has to be a member of the union. So it goes both ways. And I do think Equity as a union tries to be very flexible, because their values is the same as what I just said Circle's is, which is they want actors in Texas to work. Being in Texas, the first one comes to mind because it sounds like something in the Wild West. And that is that every time you have a new show, one of the first things you do is sit down with the equity members of the cast. Actually, the producer is not allowed in the room. And that the equity cast members and the stage manager vote, and they elect one of the equity members to be the deputy. So there's always an equity deputy for every equity production, and that deputy is the one that is watching out to make sure that there's nothing unsafe health-wise or safety-wise or policy-wise that's going on, and they make reports to equity if they feel the organization is not behaving wisely, and also issue warnings to the organization if they feel something's being overlooked. So it's a little bit of an uncomfortable feeling, because we all are very close. Most of us are really good friends, and yet there's a little division once you sit down, and it's equity and the producer, and there is a dividing line. Even if you're a small theater paying on a conservative level like we are, equity is an expensive thing to bring in as a producer. A lot of theaters just simply cannot afford to, and so especially if you're in an area where theater isn't in huge numbers, equity did not want to prohibit actors from being able to work on an ongoing basis for the smaller theaters. And so they made a provisional contract that as a smaller theater that is not fully equity, you can hire an equity actor and pay them according to what is called equity umbrella contract rules, which means that equity umbrellas the little theaters under their major organization to let them bring in their actors. So here in our organization, it just happened that the managing director of Circle Theater is also the equity paymaster for the state of Texas. In other words, without him, these theaters would not be eligible to bring in equity actors. But unless they had a full-time accountant that was going to be on board to handle equity and only equity. So he handles all of that for this state and all of the theaters that are not fully equity theaters, their payroll, their contracts, and their salary disbursements.